This morning, I started reading a new novel by Canadian author Douglas Coupland. This is the man responsible for my being branded a member of Generation X because he wrote the book of that title. And this book is called The Gum Thief. It's a kind of a recovery of, I think, something that's more of an 19th century genre, sort of epistolary novel. It's a series of letters and diary entries between two people who work at Staples. Do you have Staples? Yeah, okay. So these are two people who work at Staples for their sins, and so they correspond with each other, and this is the character Roger. A few years back, I had to organize my son Brendan's funeral. Joan was completely wrecked, and I was barely keeping it together. I remember sitting there with the funeral director, trying to think of what to say in the death notice, or whom I could invite to speak. I drew a blank, and the director, an older guy, white hair, a head shaped like a stone duck out of a Scottish field, a guy who'd been through a trench or two, suggested that no one had to speak, and we could recite grade school stuff like the Lord's Prayer. He said that most people know it by heart, and we could all get through the proceedings with a sliver of dignity. He must have smelled my breath, tequila, because he looked at me a moment, then went to his desk and pulled out some very peaty scotch, almost like swirl syrup, and poured both of us a few fingers. He told me that most people who come to arrange services don't believe in anything. He said that if he's learned anything from doing his job, it's that if you don't have a spiritual practice in place when times are good, you can't expect to suddenly develop one during a moment of crisis. He said, we're told by TV and movies and Reader's Digest that a crisis will trigger massive personal change, and that those big changes will make the pain worthwhile. But from what he could see, big change almost never happens. People simply feel lost. They have no idea what to say or do or feel or think. They become messes and tend to remain messes. Having a few default hymns and prayers at least makes the lack of crisis-born insight bearable. The man was a true shepherd of souls. So I read this on the plane this morning, and I thought it was kind of apt. So see this as a moment of conversation among us about spiritual practices in good times. Because, no, you're not going to have the opportunity to quickly develop them in moments of crisis. Which reminds me of a quote from a book by Iris Murdoch. Has anyone seen the movie Iris? It's a really, really troubling movie, and you really should see it. Iris Murdoch, a novelist, a philosopher, British, and at the end of her life, severely affected by Alzheimer's disease. And so the movie's about her life with an emphasis on the final part of it. But somewhere she said something like this, and I paraphrase, when the moment arrives for making the big choices have already been made. So has anyone seen the movie The Interpreter with Nicole Kidman? Okay, so I worked for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in 1996 and 1997. My job was not spectacular. I wasn't, Archbishop Desmond Tutu. I just worked as an interpreter. And so people would tell their stories, and I would listen to them, and 2 seconds later, I would retell their stories as closely as I can. I'm guessing I gave, like the NIV version rather than actually. I think I gave more sort of the ESV version of what they said, because there really wasn't any time in that 2-second lag for any kind of like dynamic interpretation. So it was just kind of sort of, like clunky and direct as I could, as much as I could manage it. But so I worked as an interpreter for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for those 2 years, and my job was not as spectacular as Ms. Kidman's either, but that's to be expected because I was paid so much less. Let me give you the historical context quickly. So in 1723, Georg Friedrich Strauss decided that it sucked being a plumber for the Dutch East India Company and left the ship as it rounded the Cape of Good Hope and became a small-time farmer in the Dutch colony at the Cape, at the bottom of Africa. And 10 generations later, I was born. And so my family had been there for a little while. And I grew up in a household with 2 wonderful parents. They were kind, they were cultured, they had, as best as anybody could observe, pulled themselves up by their bootlaces from great poverty. They were really green. We had to compost all our stuff in the house, and I had to compost the. We had a lot of pigeons, and they made a lot of mess, and I had to clean that up and put in the compost. So I've paid for the greenness of my parents. So they were wonderful people, and they were racists, and they were complicit. Deeply complicit, enthusiastically complicit in shaping the political system of apartheid in South Africa. My dad would, on election days, drive a van to go and pick up old people at the retirement home so they could come and vote for the National Party, the apartheid government party. They were really involved in keeping that system going. The system of apartheid involved 2 things. Let's call it grand apartheid and little apartheid. Grand apartheid had this as a theory. Every cultural community or ethnic group, if you will, has the right and the duty to flourish historically. And ethnic communities flourish best on their own. And so it's important, according to the theory, to create room, also geographically and politically, for ethnic communities to flourish. And so the idea was to divide, separate South Africa into various parts in which different ethnic groups could live and flourish. And so they could be apart. And so you'd have a state of apartness or apartheid. So that was the grand apartheid theory. It has its roots in I think, German romantic nationalism. Herder, Fichte, Schelling, people like that. And then you have little apartheid. And little apartheid meant that while we were still in the process of sorting people out ethnically, on the sort of map of South Africa, we also should use separate washrooms. So for the time being, in the specific location, we needed separate facilities of every kind for people of different races. So public washroom for black people, public washroom for white people, park bench for black people, park bench for white people, neighborhood for black people, neighborhood for white people. Not that you are unfamiliar with that.